Good afternoon, dear students. I welcome you to the online counseling class being organized by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. I am your academic counselor, Dr. Kasem Fasliullah. In this counseling session, we are going to talk about the course English Fiction prescribed in BA 6th semester. Students, this is one of the lectures or counseling session in a series of sessions we have had previously on the same course, and we will have a few more in future as well. If you recall, we started talking about this paper, English Fiction, and in our discussions, we brought about the topic of how novel as a new genre emerged in 18th century, various characteristics of this new genre, and the socio-political and economic conditions which paved the way for emergence of this form of literature. And then we moved on to talk about Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. Then we also discussed Joseph Andrews. From there, we moved on to talk about 19th century English novel of the Victorian era. We also noted down some salient features and characteristics of Victorian literature. And then we have taken up one text, that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, in our previous two classes, where we looked at or we explored the story of the novel, different important characters in the novel, various themes in the novel, and also the relevance of the title or significance of the title, Pride and Prejudice. With these things in mind, let us move on to a new topic, a new text today, that is Hard Times. Now, in this particular counseling session on Hard Times, which is a novel written by Charles Dickens, we will be trying to understand the basic circumstances in which Charles Dickens, as a writer, grew up and started writing novels, producing literature. And then we'll move to the novel itself, that is Hard Times. And in that, we will be exploring different characters, themes, structure, narrative technique, and variety of literary devices used in the novel. And eventually, we will sum up what we have learned in the counseling session. So let me start with basic information about this novel. Then we'll move on to Charles Dickens. Remember, Hard Times is a novel written in 1854. It falls under the genre or subgenre of novel, that is drama and satire. It is basically a satirical novel which portrays the Victorian society and critically comments on certain norms of the society in a satirical way. And it is one of the famous novels of Charles Dickens. The, this author, Charles Dickens, was born in Portsmouth, Hampshire, in England on February, February, February 7th, 1812, to Mary and John Dickens, a Navy payroll clerk. The Dickens family moved to London in the year 1822. Although John Dickens had a well-paying job as a clerk, he was a big spender, and the family was often in financial difficulty because of his spending habits. To contribute to the family's income, Charles the senior, or the father of Charles Dickens, was taken out of has taken out Charles Dickens from the school at the age of 12 and sent him to work in Warren's wood-blacking factory, where Charles Dickens pasted labels on jars of blacking, that is shoe polish. In those days, the conditions in the factory appalled the boy, Charles Dickens, and it was full of rats. The factory was full of rats. Its wooden floors and stairs were rotting, and the air smelled of the dirty waters of the nearby river Thames. In addition to that, factory work paid too little to help with the family's financial woes. Therefore, John Dickens was soon imprisoned for debt in Marshalsea prison in Southwark. His family lost income, lost an home, and it was common at that time. So he went to live with him at the prison. Charles, however, was sent to room with a family friend. Returning to school briefly, Dickens left again at age 15 to take a job as a clerk in a law office. After learning shorthand, he found work as a law clerk and then as a court and parliamentary reporter. Later, using his knowledge of law and government in his fiction. The Dickens' experiences as a young boy trying to make his way alone in London, especially when his father was in prison and was not able to support the family. Dickens encounters with harsh conditions of factories and prisons, and his resentment of a system that kept the poor in poverty came to inform many of his novels, which he wrote later. Loss of childhood innocence and exploitation of the vulnerable are two themes inspired by Dickens' personal tribulations and explored in his works, taking central roles in, for example, the Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, David Copperfield, Hard Times, and Great Expectations. The novels of Dickens appeared first in serial form in various London periodicals, usually with a weekly or bi-weekly installment over the course of a year or two. If you recall, when we were talking about salient features and characteristics of a Victorian novel or 19th century novel, we had this important point that at that time, novels were written in installments published in different magazines in a serialized form. Well, his two novels were published in single book form, and remaining came as installments in different magazines. For example, Hard Times appeared in weekly installments in magazines throughout 1854. When we talk about his early life, Dickens sold his first short story in the year 1833 to the monthly magazine. The following year, he began working for the Morning Chronicle, where he wrote stories under the name Boz, B-O-Z, Boz. These stories were published in the collection Sketches by Boz in 1836. This shows Charles Dickens started early as a writer, first experimenting his art in the form of short stories. Well, in the same year, that is 1836, Dickens began editing for Bentley's Miscellany. In this publication, his first two novels, The Pickwick Papers and Oliver Twist, appeared in serial form. He continued working at an intense pace for several years. As his catalog of novels grew, so did his popularity and fortune. By 1843, he published A Christmas Carol, the first and most successful of his four Christmas books. Dickens was already a household name in London. Later in his career, Dickens founded and edited two successful weekly magazines. The first one, Household Words, from 1850 to 1859. And the second one, All the Year Round, which is from 1859 to 1888. These magazines provided a platform for serializing several later novels of Dickens, including Bleak House, Hard Times, and A Tale of Two Cities. Well, in addition to writing, Dickens performed with an amateur theatrical group and gave speeches in support of causes and charities. With the financial help of Angela Budget Coates, a wealthy friend, Dickens set up a school for delinquent girls, which he directed for more than 10 years. In fact, in 1858, Dickens began to give public readings of his novels, making use of his acting experience. The readings were popular and embarked on very popular speaking tours throughout England and the United States. Well, coming to his marriage in 1836, Dickens married Catherine Hogarth, with whom he had 10 children. In the early years of his marriage and career, Dickens enjoyed fatherhood and domestic pursuits. His writing earned him sufficient money to support his family and also help settle his parents' debts. But the marriage was ultimately unhappy. The couple separated in the year 1858, a year after Dickens fell in love with actress Ellen Ternan. Dickens seems to have had a happy relationship with Ternan, but he treated Catherine Dickens poorly. He even accused her of being mentally ill and claimed she and their children were happier apart from one another. One of his daughters later said Dickens ceased to care about his children after the breakup. with their mother. In this way, Dickens' treatment of divorce in hard times presents it as a natural solution to deeply unhappy marriages. Stephen Blackpool seeks a divorce from his alcoholic and abusive wife so he can marry a more agreeable woman. Louisa Grange leaves Mr. Bounderby after an emotional breakdown. It is possible these scenes reflect Dickens' own frustration at being trapped in his marriage, as an English divorce before 1857 required parliamentary approval and cost a small fortune. Well, with these developments and these kind of happy and sad life he left with his works a lasting legacy. His novels remained highly popular throughout his lifetime, but his popularity began to decline after his death. This is unlike Jane Austen, who was not very popular in her lifetime, but her popularity grew after she departed from this world. The case of Charles Dickens is quite contrary. He was popular in his lifetime, but his popularity began to decline after his death. Early 20th century critics praised serious novels by modernist authors such as James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, and by comparison, found Dickens' novels shallow and careless constructed. In 1840, in 1940s, however, saw a revival of critical interest and appreciation for Dickens' ability to combine compelling stories with significant social criticism. So Dickens regained his popularity in second half of 20th century, and since then there is no turning back. The English writer and satirist George Orwell commented on Dickens' work in 1940, and I quote, "In Oliver Twist, Hard Times, Black House, Little Dorrit, Dickens attacked English institutions with a ferocity that has never since been approached. Yet he managed to do it without making himself hated. And more than this, the very people he attacked have swallowed him so completely that he has become a national institution himself." Quote ends. Charles Dickens died from a stroke on June 9th, 1870. By 1970, the centenary of his death, Dickens' reputation in English literature was largely on par with William Shakespeare's. The only difference is Shakespeare's popularity was because of his dramas, whereas Dickens' popularity was because of his novels. Uh, Let us now move to the text Hard Times. I think it is appropriate, especially when we are going to understand hard times, to have the context before us. So it becomes easier to connect with the novel and understand an extra layer of meaning of the text. We know that the major social change that had happened in the 19th century was industrial revolution. The first wave of the Industrial Revolution in Britain took place between 1760 and 1830 as technologies emerged to increase production of goods and expanded trade, increased demand. These changes in early decades of the 19th century created a shift towards economies based on manufacturing and urban living that redefined society first in England as well as the United States and the rest of Europe throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century. For example, the cotton textile industry was one of the first to shift towards automation with the invention of machines such as the spinning jenny and the power loom in the late 1700s. Powered by steam, these devices could produce far more fabric in far less time than a single spinner or weaver could with a traditional wheel or loom. Therefore, cloth production moved from homes or small workshops to factories, prompting workers to migrate from rural areas to cities where factories were located, which greatly changed English life at the time. Well, scholars define the Industrial Revolution as taking place between 1760 and 1830. The decades that followed witnessed an ongoing proliferation of factories in urban centers. Outside London, especially in the north of England, small towns grew as large numbers of people moved there to find work. Housing was hastily and often poorly constructed to accommodate the new residents. Additional factories were also built to produce the machinery of manufacturing. Mines were expanded to provide coal to power steam engines, which produced tremendous amount of smoke and coal dust. For instance, London became famous for its thick fog in the 19th century. The result of industrial smoke mixing with natural moisture in the air. At the time, no environmental attention was paid to the conditions. The novel Hard Times addresses the social and political changes associated with industrialization through the portrayal of Coke Town, its name in reference to coke, the residue left from burning coal. The condition of this fictional industrial city in England mirror those found in growing factory towns such as Manchester, Sheffield, and Liverpool. The substandard housing and the proliferation of smokestacks are presented in detailed descriptions in the novel Hard Times. Coming to the factory conditions, Charles Dickens knew firsthand the working conditions in the factories of industrial England. From his time as a 12-year-old in Warren's wood blacking factory in London, his account of this time describes the filthy floors, rotting staircases, constant dampness, and swarms of rats. Child labor in factories was common, as impoverished families needed all sources of income in the changed society. And some children worked because they had no families at all. Dickens' experience at Valence was unpleasant, but less hazardous than the experiences of young laborers who operated machines. Such conditions eventually prompted the Parliament to enact regulations in 1833 to limit working hours and improve conditions for children in factories. Nevertheless, for both children and adults, hours remain long, pay low, food scarce, and despite some regulation, conditions dirty and often unsafe. In hard times, Dickens combines his personal experiences with political understanding to criticize the conditions found in the 19th century factories throughout England and Europe. Well, coming to the living conditions outside the factories and within the society, life outside the factories was scarcely better than the conditions within the factories. Accounts abound of overcrowded and cramped living spaces, the result of low wages and population shift from rural to urban areas. With a lack of sanitations, a series of a serious problem, outbreaks of disease are not unusual, especially in manufacturing centers in northern England, location of the fictional folk town of hard times, because they were farther away from the regulatory eye of the government in London. This is the reason that prompted philosopher Frederick Engels, before writing the Communist Manifesto in 1848, with fellow philosopher Karl Marx, published an account of his observation of the English factories in 1843. His description of the city of Manchester includes, and I quote, irregular cramming together of dwellings in ways which defy all rational plan. Quote ends. One such cluster of dwellings is described surrounding, and I quote, a privy without a door, so dirty that the inhabitants can pass into and out of the court only by passing through foul pools of stagnant urine and excrement. Quote ends. The rest of his description of Manchester contains similarly distinct details of filth and stench combined with unsafe and inadequate accommodations. In Hard Times, Dickens provides less explicit description of the subpar living conditions factories workers inhabit, but he does represent characters such as poor factory worker Stephen Blackwood, who offer insight about the human consequences of living in close proximity to such squalor and who make impassioned pleas for improved condition for himself and his peers. Now, let us look at the summary of, you know, or an outline of the story of the novel Hard Times. Hard Times is a novel written by Dickens, first published in 1854. It is set in the fictional industrial town of Coketown during the mid 19th century. The novel explores social and economic challenges faced by the working class during the Industrial Revolution. The narrative centers around several characters, including Thomas Gradgrind, including Thomas Gradgrind, a strict utilitarian schoolmaster, and his children, Louisa and Tom. The story delves into the consequences of rigid utilitarianism. The exploitation at times is deeply rooted in the socioeconomic transformations of the Industrial Revolution. Dickens uses the novel to critique the dehumanizing effects of industrial life. industrialization, the harsh conditions of factory labor, and the prevailing utilitarian philosophy that prioritize facts and figures over human emotions. The characters' experiences reflect the broader social issues of the time, shedding light on the disparities between the wealthy industrialist and the impoverished working class. Contemporary readers may find resonance in Hard Times as it addresses enduring themes such as the consequences of unchecked capitalism and the importance of empathy and compassion. The novel's exploration of social justice, as its call for a more compassionate society, remains relevant in discussions about the intersection of economic, education, and morality. It is, as I told you, satire, right? And coming to one keyword that we came across in our summary or overview of the novel, that is utilitarianism. What it is? Let us let us understand what utilitarianism is. Utilitarianism at this time became a popular philosophical school of thought among the educated class, developed by political economist J.S. Mill, that is John Stuart Mill, and social reformer Jeremy Bentham. Utilitarianism rested on the idea that self-interest drives all human behavior, and one must evaluate action by their potential to create pleasure rather than pain to the individual. Understanding the facts rather than the emotional implications or imagined outcomes of a given situation is essential to such evaluation. On a larger moral scale, goodness also can be evaluated according to the consequences of actions and how much good or evil those consequences might bring to how many people. In this way, one can analyze and quantify human behavior in ways that were very new compared to compared with the philosophies of the past. In hard times, the utilitarian model led Dickens to satirize and exaggerate both Mr. Bounderby's and Mr. Gradgrind's strict reliance on fact and reason to assess situations and make decisions. Mr. Gradgrind, especially, must face the consequences of such extreme pedagogy when he sees emotional harsh barrenness as its result. In Louisa's passivity and inability to deal with emotion, in Tom's detached sense of entitlement and rebellion against the lack of amusement, and in Witzer's uncompromising rigidity and soullessness in acting only as he was trained to. When we start the novel, we come to realize that hard times starts with memorable, you know, lines. I would like to, quote those memorable lines. And the book starts, facts alone are wanted in life. Plan nothing else and root out everything else. You can only form the mind of reasoning animals upon facts. Facts, nothing else will ever be of any service to them. Well, these famous lines are intriguing and in the very beginning points to this utilitarianism, indicate the utilitarian model that is being followed by both Bonderby and Gradgrind. Now let's try to know characters in the novel. There are many important characters in the novel, starting from Louisa Gradgrind. Louisa Gradgrind is an obedient and generally passive young woman whose belief in or refusal to question her father's philosophy of pure reason leads her into a loveless marriage and an eventual mental breakdown. We have Mr. Bounderby, Bounderby, a wealthy factory owner and bank owner in Coketown, claims to have raised himself from nothing to his current position of power and influence. Then we have Mr. Grant. So Thomas Gradgrind is a schoolmaster of some wealth who believes the understanding of all facts and the application of pure reason will result in a happy and prosperous life. We have Tom Gradgrind, the oldest Gradgrind child. Tom represents his limited education and job at the bank. He spends most of his adult life expecting Lisa to bail him out of the trouble he causes himself. You have Sissy Jupe, abandoned for a good reason by her father, a circus performer. Sissy Jupe is taken into the Gradgrind family to care for Mrs. Gradgrind and attend school. The Gradgrinds believe they have saved Sissy, but she saves them as well. We have Stephen Blackwood, a poor factory worker trapped in a miserable marriage. Stephen Blackpool runs afoul of Mr. Bounderby, is forced to leave town, and is falsely accused of robbery. And we have Mrs. Sparsit. She is described as having a classical face and heavy dark eyebrows. Mrs. Sparsit is Mr. Bounderby's high-born housekeeper and companion until he marries Louisa Gradfield, whom Mrs. Sparsit resents for displacing her. Bitzer, an unpleasant schoolmate of Sissy, Louisa and Tom. Blitzer learns facts well and grows up to have ambitions at back, exposing Tom in the hope of obtaining his position. And we have Mrs. Blackpool. Mrs. Blackpool is Stephen Blackpool's alcoholic and abusive wife who leaves home long periods of time and returns only when she is too ill to stay away. There are many such, multiple uh, characters, a long list of characters we have in the archives. What I will do is, we'll try to understand certain important things about main characters, especially starting with, Louisa Gradgrind. Louisa Gradgrind, uh, just give me a second, please. Well, we'll understand, important characters. Few important points about, major characters in the novel, Hard Times. Louisa Gradgrind, as a child, Louisa absorbed her father's teachings about the value of factual analysis and pure reason, rejecting imagination and sentiment completely. At 20, she marries Joshua Bounderby, a man 30 years older, because she believes it matters little whom she marries and has no other prospect at the time. When she meets and develops feelings for the young teacher, James Harthouse, she spins into a crisis of conscience and must evaluate her understanding of herself and her world. And we have Mr. Bounderby, who proudly, loudly, and frequently proclaims to have been born in a ditch, abandoned there by his mother, and rescued by an abusive grandmother who raised him. He also claims to have ascended to his position of wealth and respect in Coketown by means of his own cunning and enterprise, overcoming abuse and hardship every step of the way. He respects his workers, believing they feel entitled to what he calls luxuries, but in fact are basic necessities of life. After his marriage collapses, the truth about his family, he was raised by a loving, middle-class, widowed mother, emerges, and his status diminishes. And we have Mr. Gradgrin. Gradgrin's intentions are good as he raises his students and his children to embrace factual analysis and logic to ensure their long-term success and prosperity. However, he grows increasingly fond of his kind-hearted and imaginative ward, Sissy June, despite her inadequacies in the statement of facts and reason. When his favorite child, Louisa, reveals the miseries of her own life and begs for his help, he feels powerless to understand emotion and soon after abandons pure reason for a more balanced approach to life. His son, Tom Gradgrin, grows up feeling resentful of his father's philosophies and halting his own work. Referred to as a wealth, Tom is often irresponsible, entitled, selfish, disreputable, and honest. As he rebels against the constraints of his upbringing, Tom drinks heavily and incurs massive gambling debts. When Louisa is no longer able to help him, he steals from the bank and attempts to frame Stephen Blackpool for the crime. Tom's family helps him escape from England when the truth is known, but he comes to appreciate them only as he is dying alone abroad. Sissy Jupe, she is the daughter of a horse riding circus clown who hopes his daughter will get an education and have a more stable life than he and the circus can provide. Sissy is a poor student of Mr. Gradgrin's facts and reason based curriculum, but he possesses more nuanced wisdom in seeing at an early age that facts are not the only basis for knowledge. Sissy sees issues from a larger perspective and has the ability to understand them from different angles. So this kind of understanding, combined with her kind heart, helps the Gradgrins in difficult times when facts do not. Another important character is Stephen Blackpool. He is the same person who was blamed for the Tom's crime. He works in one of the Bounderpiece factories. He is married to an alcoholic who leaves home for long stretches of time, returning when she is too weak to function or on her own. Stephen Blackpool would like to divorce her so he can marry Rachel, the woman he loves, but divorce is not possible for people with no money and influence. Instead, he does his duty and his work until his honesty and desire to avoid trouble and anger both the union organizer and his employer. He leaves town but is forced to return to defend himself against false allegations of bank robbery leveled by Tom. On his return trip, he falls into a disused coal pit and dies of his injuries shortly after he is rescued. Well, the last important character is Mrs. Sparsit. Mrs. Sparsit was born and married within a higher class than her occupation as Mr. Bonderby's housekeeper implies. She takes this job after her husband dies, but resents having to leave the position with Mr. Bonderby marries, even though he gives her a comfortable position at the bank. She plots against Lisa and later accidentally exposes Mr. Boundary's fraudulent life story when she attempts to investigate the bank robbery. So, students, in this counseling session, we have tried to understand the background in which Charles Dickens has written this novel Hard Times, and we have also looked at the early life and works of Charles Dickens and the socio-economic conditions of his times and a few prominent things that appear in his works. From there, we tried to have an overview of the novel, and after that, we took up different characters, different important and major characters in the novel. We have also tried to understand a few important facts about each character mentioned in the novel, their personality types, their role in the story, and how they affect the other characters and the story. And with this, I think I should, you know, bring our discussion and counseling session uh, to an end. In the next class, we will again take up hard times and we will go into the details of the themes mentioned in the novel, different literary devices used in the novel, the narrative structure, and narrative other literary elements in the novel. So till that time, take care of yourself. See you in the next class on hard times, the same time uh, in the virtual or online session hosted by hosted by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University. Goodbye. God bless you.